I'm back with my mushroom sweater on for fall. I love mushrooms, not the recreational kind. I don't have anything against psilocybin, but I don't partake myself. I just really like mushrooms. Look how cute they are. It's from Shein. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I shop at Shein, but that's where it's from if you're wondering. So I had to take a little bit of a break from making videos because this month I bit off way more than I could chew. There's just so many things happening this month. Work, obviously. I am completing a certification program that takes up like every other weekend, all weekend. I have been trying to do NaNoWriMo. It hasn't really been going well because I've been so busy. And of course, social obligations. So yes, unlike you, I have things to do with people that like me. Just kidding, I love you. I'm sure you're all very busy with friends and stuff. So today I wanted to share with you some of my recent reads. I don't do like monthly wrap-ups simply because I don't read enough every month to justify wrapping it up every month. I'm a quick reader, but I don't prioritize reading, so it takes me a while to get through books. So even like the shortest books can take me whereas for most people it'll probably take them a day, it'll take me like 3 to 5 days to get through like less than 200 pages. So before I start anything, I wanted to share with you, I've shared before, but I'm going to say it again, my rating process, because I realized that when it comes to rating movies and books, say out of 5 stars, people feel very skewed on what each portion represents, right? So like, if you say a movie is 4 stars, some people will assume that that means, oh my God, you really hated that movie. But it's like, what? 4 out of 5 stars. That's like getting a 90 in a class and saying you did poorly. Like, I know for some people, they would think that that's bad, but it's not. It's just objectively not. So I am going to relate my star rating to toilet paper. Bear with me on this. So 1 star, like 1 ply, you might as well just not even use toilet paper, right? Like, it is not going to do the job. Nobody wants it. It's like something that you buy when you're looking for the cheapest thing and you're a little bit desperate. Maybe you don't have like a receipt in your purse that you could use that would probably do the job better. 1 star books. I typically don't rate any books 1 star only because if I've gotten about quarter of the way through the book and it's feeling like a 1 star, I won't finish it because life is too short to finish books that you don't like, or movies, or stay on a date you don't like, or whatever. So I don't think it's fair to rate a book that I haven't completed. So 1 star, 1 ply, 2 ply, okay, that's a little bit better, but not the best. It kind of feels like sandpaper, right? Like this isn't luxury territory. It's probably what you will find in your college dorm or at work or something like that. We're just like skimping on resources here. 2 stars, not the best book you've ever read. Maybe it's got a weird plot. Maybe the characters are 2D. Maybe there's like spelling and grammar errors abound. And there's just like a whole bunch of pieces that make it difficult to get through, and you definitely wouldn't recommend it to anybody that you know. So 3 ply, 3 stars, we're getting to pretty normal here. I mean, most toilet paper that you would buy is about 3 ply, right? Like, that's legit. We can use that. We feel comfortable with that. It does the job. 3-star books for me are just an average experience. Like, I finish a book that's 3 stars and I'm like, this was fine. It's not poorly written, but here's like a laundry list of things that I would change or I would do differently if I wrote this book myself. I wouldn't necessarily. I guess I would recommend it with reservations. You know, I would say to people, I didn't like this book, but it wasn't terrible. Try it for yourself and see what you think if you like this genre or the style of writing or something like that. 4 stars, that's luxury stuff, right? That's what like celebrities use. Okay, that's what you find in a 5-star resort, a spa, a nice hotel, a nice restaurant. Now we're getting up there. A 4-star book for me is kind of like most books that I find really good. Like if I finish a book and I'm like, wow, I really liked that, odds are, to me, it's 4 stars. So it's really hit all of the points that I really like. The writing is great. The characters are great. I feel fully immersed. There's not really much that takes me out of it. But a lot of the time, a 4-star book is missing like a little bit of oomph. You know, maybe I'm not thinking about it days later. Maybe it's the first in a series and I liked it well enough, but I wouldn't continue the series because it didn't really grip me enough to get me there. So a 4-star book is kind of like, if I am writing a book, that's what I would aim for, would be somewhere between 3 and 4 stars. Because if people feel that way about a book that I write, I feel like I've done a pretty good job. So 5-ply toilet paper. Have you ever seen 5-ply toilet paper anywhere? That is what like Jeff Bezos uses to wipe his ass. Or someone else does it for him, rather, because I'm sure he pays someone to do things like that for him, right? 5-ply and 5-star books for me do not exist. Like they are few and far between. They are my favorite books or movies, right? Because I'm saying books, but the same applies to movies. 5 stars are like my favorites of all time. The Giver by Lois Lowry, which is one of my favorite books. Now that's a young adult book. I first read it when I was 11 years old, but it still feels like a classic and a really good book. Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, who is one of my favorite authors. It would be Almost Anything by Gillian Flynn, who again is one of my favorite authors. I really love the way that she writes characters. It's the writing that for me, you fall in love with. You really love the characters. You relate to the characters. Everything feels very realistic and it flows really well. And for me as a writer, it inspires me to write, to change my writing. I mean, The Giver and Fahrenheit 451 are probably the reasons why I write in the dystopian genre mostly, because I love those books so much. So those are 5-star books. Few and far between. It's like being the professor that's like, nobody gets 100 in my class. Like that's rare for, I don't give out hundreds. That's me. I don't really give out 5 stars very often. So if I do come across a 5-star book, you know that I've really, really loved it. So I read books so slowly that my 2023 reading challenge was at 15 books. And I just read 16. I finished one last night. So my recently read books are going to go all the way back to August. The first one, I'm going to put a picture of it here because I don't have a physical copy. And I'm going to put any potential trigger warnings here for each book rather than like spell it out for you. So the first book is called Without Conscience, The Disturbing World of the Psychopaths Among Us by Dr. Robert D. Hare. So I read this book as research for a podcast that I have done. We haven't really updated it in a while, with my best friend Jordan. It's called Biopsychosocial if you're interested. This was an episode we did about the psyche of psychopaths. Dr. Robert Hare created the psychopath checklist, and he did all of the research. He worked firsthand with people who are psychopaths, and the psychopath checklist was intended to predict psychopathic, dangerous, potentially violent behavior in individuals. The book, although it goes over his research and how he came to the conclusions that he did, the intention behind the book was to inform the general public about what a psychopath looks like. I mean, not like what they, like their aesthetic, what they actually look like, but he wants people to be able to recognize what they sound like, how they behave, the tricks that they usually have up their sleeves. He wanted people to realize that psychopaths are individuals who physically cannot experience empathy they don't experience anxiety. They don't really experience fear. They have very, very tiny amygdalas, which is the, I think, almond shaped or sized part of our brain that is in charge of fear responses, right? So like if you're a normal human being, which most of you watching are, and you experience fear, you probably have a normal sized amygdala, and you're probably not a psychopath. These people really just, it sounds cruel to say this, but they're barely human. And he didn't want people to get into dangerous or abusive situations if they could avoid it, right? Like not in a victim blaming sense, like, oh, if you recognize these signs and you ignore it, you're an idiot. But he realizes how difficult it is to get out of the sway of some of these very manipulative people because he fell for it himself. So his intention was to just inform people, lay people, right? I started out actually reading The Psychopath Test by Jon Ronson, and I hated it. I mean, I had the annotations in my Kindle for this book where I was so angry. I'm going to put them on the screen. He kept referring to Dr. Hare as Bob Hare. He has never met this man in his life. Dr. Hare turned down requests to be interviewed for the book. They are not on a nickname basis. And, you know, when Dr. Hare was communicating with him, because he has this whole essay, this like letter up on his website with this very shady read of Jon Ronson. Definitely check it out. It's so petty and funny. Where he essentially suggests, you know, if you want to know more information about this, you can go to a weekend seminar that teaches you about the psychopath checklist and how it works. And he was very clear with Mr. Ronson, and is very clear in this book, that just because you're reading about this and you're learning about this doesn't give you enough information to diagnose someone. Like, you're not a professional, you're not an expert after you read this. And he says himself, like, even I can't diagnose someone from afar. They have to be my client. I have to have a full biopsychosocial workup. I have to know. And Jon Ronson allegedly takes this seminar and thinks that he's an expert after. So, you know, like, without even knowing any of his background, I got annoyed at that book. So I was like, let me go straight to the horse's mouth. I read this book. I thought it was really good. I gave it 4 stars. I think it's really informative. And I think he communicates well to someone who is not in the field of mental health or psychology, in terms of like what these behaviors look like, what they mean, the origins of them. I think I was kind of hoping, well, I should say that there was some criticism. There's some criticism to his work, which doesn't mean that it's bad or it's wrong. That's just a normal part of like this, you know, scientific research. What I found Metz about the book was that it really focused on the prison population, which, as some of you may know, the American prison population is overwhelmingly Black men. So I'm wondering what kind of conclusions he's trying to draw here. And I'm not making any insinuations. I think more so the criticism just criticism there is that this is almost like a convenience sample, that he's using these people that he's working with. But as with all old psychological testing, you get this one group that everything is normed off of. And I think it really deserves a lot more research in terms of different races, gender identities, ages of people, right? Because most of the people he interviewed were adults. And I think that we would find more interesting data there. But anyways, I digress. I'm such a nerd about all of this stuff, so I'm just going to go to my next book that I read. So next, Mukbang Princess by Rain Havoc. I read 2 Rain Havoc books in a row. Here are the trigger warnings for this one. This book was 10 pages long, so it took me a couple of minutes to read. And after looking at the Goodreads reviews, I was like, I have to know. Everyone was really great in the reviews and didn't give it away, but I really, I had to know if what I thought was going to happen happened. And I was right. I also read, I'm going to kind of review these together because I read them back to back. I also read her book, Killstreme. Here's the cover. Here are the trigger warnings. Killstreme is about snuff films. It's about snuff corn. We follow the protagonist. I think his name is like Wesley or something annoying like that. And he has this proclivity for a certain kind of material that he seeks out, like when his wife has gone to bed. And he gets the opportunity to star in his own film with his choice of sex worker, with his choice of woman who he gets to do things to. And what I liked about it was that I could tell from the way that Rain Havoc was writing this male protagonist that she did not like him. I'm reading it and I'm like, geez, is this guy like what's going on here? And it turns out that I was correct in that, right? He's not like the hero of the story by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, how could someone who's into this kind of stuff be... I'm sorry, but how could you be a decent person and be into this kind of stuff? Anything that involves any living thing being harmed, no, you're on the naughty list, and not the fun naughty list, the bad one. What I can say about Rain Havoc's writing is it's extreme horror, but make it girly. Like, it's splatterpunk with pink glitter. Like, it's like this interesting feminine take on these topics. I really liked it. I thought it was a lot of fun. I think that she doesn't take herself too seriously, and that's what makes it really good. Killstreme was definitely very intense. I think it was probably the first like extreme horror book that I read where I was like, oh, I thought I was going to be sick when I was reading it. And Mukbang Princess as well. Like, I think I would be remiss if I was like, no, that one was fine, but the other one was too much for me. People generally, it seems like her writing. Killstreme has a 4.14 rating on Goodreads. Both Mukbang Princess and Killstreme have a 4 from me. I really liked them. I would read more of her stuff. I found it on godless.com. I don't know if it exists on Amazon, but definitely check her out. I've listened to a few interviews with her, and she seems like a really chill person. Not that that necessarily plays any factor in how well a person can write, but it just adds to it, right? So the next book that I read was Merciless by Brian Smith. And the reason this was on my TBR was because it sounded like a really interesting premise. So the premise is, and it won the 2020 Splatterpunk Award nominee. Sorry, it wasn't a winner. It was a nominee for Best Novel. So it says, psycho newlyweds Grant and Lindsay Weatherby are true crime junkies with a thirst to know what it feels like to kill for real. Young, prosperous, and good-looking, they are seen by friends and family as the perfect couple. No one sees the dark side to their love. After their wedding, they embark on a trip across the country. As their honeymoon gift to each other, they plan to abduct, torture, and kill a stranger. But what was planned as a controlled one-time event soon explodes into a spiraling orgy of bloody, nightmarish violence and depravity. Sounds interesting, right? Like, here I am picturing these two people who, like so many of us, are like obsessed with true crime. Maybe they listen to podcasts, they watch documentaries, read books, whatever, and they're like, yeah, let's see. I wonder what it's like to do this ourselves, to be, oh yeah, here's the trigger warnings, by the way, and the book cover. The book cover, the trigger warnings. I thought, they went on a road trip, and at each stop, a new event where they unalive someone. That is not what happens at all. This book is a 3-star for me. I did not like it. I did not like this book. I don't think Brian Smith is a bad writer per se. Like, in terms of the way that he write. I don't know how to, like, stringing together of the words, the syntax and diction, I guess, are fine, right? Everything else about it, pretty much, I didn't like. The characters in this book were not well written at all. Lindsay struck me as like a Mary Sue, which was interesting because I didn't expect to see a Mary Sue in the extreme horror splatterpunk genres. So for those of you who don't know, let me get the definition for Mary Sue. So from Wikipedia, not me. A Mary Sue is a character archetype in fiction, usually a young woman who is often portrayed as inexplicably competent across all domains, gifted with unique talents or powers, liked or respected by most other characters, unrealistically free of weaknesses, extremely attractive, innately virtuous, and or generally lacking meaningful character flaws. So a Mary Sue, and the male version I think is Marty Stew or something like that, right? Because they can be men too. And Mary Sue fits whatever story or genre she goes into. So you see this a lot in fan fiction, and the original Mary Sue was in a Star Trek piece of fan fiction. So if it's a Harry Potter character, she is smarter than Hermione. She knows all the history of Hogwarts. She is the perfect wizard. Or witch, I'm sorry. She's beautiful. Everyone loves her. She's like the star member of Dumbledore's army. But then if you put a Mary Sue in, say, I don't know, some horror movie like Jason, right? Right? Like Friday the 13th. And she, for some reason, you want to try to write Jason as like a romantic character. This happens a lot in fan fiction. She is a killer and she's really good at it, and she's so depraved, but she's beautiful and she's perfect, and she understands him and he wants to change for her, and all of these ridiculous things that don't make any sense. Lindsay is that character in this book, right? She is just so messed up, but she's also really skilled at what she does. So none of the victims can outmaneuver her in any way, shape, or form. She is drop dead gorgeous, right? She's poised from the beginning to like win. You know, you get this sense across the course of the novel that it's not going to end well for anyone involved, mostly because of her. And she's also, of course, because I'm so sorry. Of course, because a man wrote this, she is like hypersexual as well, right? The number of times Brian Smith mentions that Lindsay is a marathon runner, but she also has a perfect curvaceous body. Brian Smith has never seen a long distance runner before in his life, has he? Because women who are long distance runners are beautiful. They're stunners, don't get me wrong. But that is not the body type of a runner, right? Long distance runners tend to be like long and lean and muscular. They look athletic, like they look like they could run for 30 miles in a stretch or 50 miles or whatever. I don't know how anyone can run that long. So you can't have it all, I guess, is what annoyed me about this book. I just found her to be this really grating character. It's worth noting, too, that in the reviews for this book on Goodreads, a lot of people of color have found it to be problematic the way the only person of color in this novel was dealt with. One of the victims is a Hispanic man, and he's really dehumanized in the language that's used with the killers in the book. And I think as a white person, it's difficult for me to see what the line is between, Brian Smith trying to make these characters really unlikable and really evil by making them racist, or if it is his voice coming through. I don't know this man. I'm not going to try to make any allegations, and neither did anyone really in the reviews, but I think it's probably worth noting that was a pretty iffy part of the book. I had a lot of annotations here where I came off pretty annoyed at what was going on. seems like the reviews are pretty mixed anyways. But yeah, I mean, 3 stars. So based on what I told you before, this isn't the worst book I've ever read. Pick it up, see if you like it. If you're into splatterpunk, it's definitely, there's gratuitous violence in here. So check it out. The next book I read is called I Found Puppets Living in My Apartment Walls. Cover, trigger warnings. So this is by Ben Farthing. I found it on godless.com, and I went there specifically to look up Brain Havoc's books. And I just happened to see the cover for this, and I was like, and it was 99 cents. So I was like, I want to read this. This looks really cool. So it was right after My Friendly Neighborhood came out, and I don't play horror games because there's not enough distance between me and what's happening, as in a book or a movie. So I watched other people play it, and it's like a really cute, not cute, but it's like a really fun game, you know, it's a horror game about like Sesame Street-esque puppets. And similarly, I Found Puppets Living in My Apartment Walls is a horror story about Sesame Street-esque puppets. So the protagonist, I'm sorry I forgot his name, the protagonist lost his grandfather. He didn't die, but he became demented. He came down with dementia. He developed dementia or Alzheimer's, and he went missing. And this main character and his cousin go back to the apartment where their grandfather lived, which was originally the studio that created this puppet show. And when the puppet show shut down, was created into several different apartments. So the grandpa stayed there. This book was I really enjoyed reading this book because it was so creative and it was so well written. A lot of people in the reviews for Ben Farthing's writing have said that they have like this creepypasta or goosebump-esque quality to them. And I definitely agree with that. Again, another book that doesn't, a writer, I should say, that doesn't take himself too seriously. And so it's a little lighthearted at times. It's fun. There's a lot of action. Just the creativity is what struck me about this book. He also included an afterword where he talks about how he, as a kid, had, I believe he said this, that he had nightmares about a giant puppet. And I was like, Mr. Farthing, Ben, we have to talk about this because I had that exact same nightmare when I was about 4 or 5. It's like the first nightmare I remember having is of a giant puppet rampaging through my town. What is with that? I mean, it's probably a simple explanation, like we were all watching Sesame Street when we were growing up. But that is absolutely wild. He and I were also both so afraid of Sweetums from The Muppet Show. I loved The Muppet Show as a kid. My first and only trip to Disney World, when I was about 5 or 6 years old, they had this Muppet Show. And at the end of it, like when everyone's filing out, Sweetums is walking around the stage. I cried hysterically. I was so scared. So if I didn't already say this, I gave the book 4 stars. I definitely think you should check Ben Farthing out. I think that I'm just surprised that I haven't heard other people mentioning his work. He has a lot of other books. There's another I found in this series. I think it's I Found a Circus Tent in the Woods Behind My House. That's definitely on my TBR now. They are on godless.com. I think they're also on Amazon. And he's one to watch, so check out his books. So next, I changed gears a little bit, and I read Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, and I really liked this book. I gave it 4 stars. Trigger warnings. There's not really too many trigger warnings. This is not a horror book. This is a sci-fi thriller. Dark Matter is about quantum mechanics, and after reading this, and then watching the show Bodies, which is also about quantum mechanics. And then, I just started playing through Quantum Break, which I'm actually not really liking the game, but I'm kind of an expert on quantum theory now because of all of that. I'm just saying. This was a really good thriller. This is about a scientist. His name is Jason Dessen, who invents time travel, basically. Not time travel. This is about the theory of multiverses. So he creates a way for our minds to expand enough that we can recognize other alternate universes and the simple fact, or the simple theme here, is choices. So like, if I had made a different choice, what would my life be like? And we all have that question, right? About so many different choices in our lives. And I think the multiverse theory, which I definitely don't understand correctly, is that every time we make a choice, we create an alternate universe or an alternate timeline where we've made an alternate choice. And that affects the world in different ways. It probably mostly affects us, but sometimes it has that butterfly effect of having massive changes in the world. And so Jason Dessen is kidnapped one night, and he is sent to a different alternate universe where he is someone else. He has lived a completely different life. He's not married to his wife. His son doesn't exist. And so it is about him discovering what the hell is going on and trying to figure out how to get back to his wife, who he loves dearly. It's very adorable. After reading Merciless and this horribly written female character, it was a nice relief to read this book, where the lead female characters were just, people. They're just regular people. But there's definitely a love story in this book, but it's not so heavy-handed that I would want to put it down, because I'm really not into romance. So Dark Matter, 4 stars, definitely check it out. Next, I recommended this to people on my TikTok. If you don't follow me on TikTok, I'm Kayla Hearts Horror over there. I'm at Kayla Hearts Horror on Instagram. Exquisite Corpse by Poppy Z. Bright. You all, whoever on YouTube and TikTok and whatever said that this was a beautifully written book, did not lie. This is a beautifully written book. This is a romance novel about serial killers. I gave this book 5 stars. It's one of those rarities that I just really loved, because I finished it and I clutched it to my chest, and I just could not believe what a great time I had reading this book, which is a little crazy because some of the content, trigger warnings, some of the content is dicey, to say the least. It is pretty graphic and gory and violent at times. But because it's so beautifully written, you really get caught up in the prose, and you get caught up on the relationships between these people. And these characters are so fascinating and believable and realistic. And so it takes place mainly in New Orleans. It starts out in London, or I should say in England. And the majority of it takes place in New Orleans in the 80s. And the characters are all gay men. And so it goes into themes of the HIV/AIDS crisis and homophobia, and Tran, who is one of the main characters, is a Vietnamese American man who's about 20 years old. And so not only is he navigating, coming into the world as in a general, as a young adult, but as a gay man, and having to navigate what it means to be Vietnamese American and gay and feel rejected by his family. And he's trying to get over this man who he thought was the love of his life. And he just gets caught up in some very dangerous situations. Poppy Z. Bright it's worth noting that Poppy Z. Bright is a trans man. His name is William Joseph Martin. And Poppy Z. Bright is now considered to be one of his pen names. So I'm going to refer to him with he, him pronouns. So this was the last book, I believe, in the horror genre that he published. And I could kind of understand why, because it's a lot. I could see someone writing a book like this and then being I cannot touch that again. That affected my life too deeply. But he did go on to write some other books. It looks like as recently as 2003. I don't know if maybe he's retired from writing in general. But either way, check this out. Check out some of his other works. There's a little bit of a backlog to look through. So beautifully written. Like, how does someone learn how to write like that? I don't know. So next was the audiobook of The Woman in Me by Britney Spears. Trigger warnings. I'm sure if you haven't read or listened to this book yet, you've probably heard bits and bobs here and there about Britney's experiences based on what she tells us in this book. I'm assuming that, like most celebrities, it was probably written, not ghostwritten, but written alongside someone else. You know, like she's telling her stories to somebody and they're polishing it up to make it interesting. I mean, and that's not any hate to Britney. Like, if I told someone my life story, it would not be interesting enough for a book. Hers was to begin with. But, you know, they have to sensationalize it a little bit to make it interesting, really. She takes us from her childhood all the way up to the present point where she was writing the book after her conservatorship ended. She goes through her experience, you know, reaching stardom and all of the hard work that took and the toll that it took on her and her family. She talks about her experiences with the media, her relationship with Justin Timberlake, what happened in her relationship with Kevin Federline, and what it means to her to be a mother. She talks about some pretty traumatic things that I could see. You know, I mentioned the trigger warnings, but I could see that being difficult for a lot of people to read. It was really hard and heartbreaking for me to read at times. I think the thing that stood out to me the most about this book was that the way that she talks about other female, not just pop stars, but actors too, but just like other women in her industry, there is not even a hint of jealousy here. I think she's negative about Christina Aguilera, but like minutely so. Like, the way that she talks about Mariah Carey, for example, she's like, oh my, you know, Mariah Carey, she wanted to get this picture perfect and I didn't mind at all because it's Mariah Carey. And she just talks about these women like they are phenomenal and she feels blessed to have met them. She strikes me as like very stereotypically Southern in the way that she is so humble and so grateful and appreciative. I think a lot of people who have worked with her have said that she's very salt of the earth, very down to earth. And I think because of that, it hurts even more to know what she experienced and how unfair and more traumatic it was that she experienced all of these things. But I was really I'm glad that she shared her story with us. I was really glad to read it. I think Michelle Williams did a really good job reading it. If you haven't heard the snippets where Michelle Williams is Justin Timberlake, look them up. They're hilarious. I'm sorry, but he deserved it. That book was a 4-star from me. It was, it didn't take me very long to get through. It was a really good read. So next I read The Girl in 6E by A.R. Torrey. I'm not exactly sure. So this book is about Deanna, who is a sex worker. She's a cam girl, and she has stayed inside her apartment for the last 3 years because she has these homicidal ideations, these murderous impulses, and in order to keep herself from getting in trouble and in order to keep other people safe, she keeps herself locked in there. So she has like a neighbor of hers who is dependent on substances that she can get him. Here's trigger warnings. So she's got this neighbor who locks her in at night because that's when the impulses become very strong. And for most of the day, she just makes tons and tons and tons of money on a campsite. And the author did a lot of research into that world, and it shows, right? I think that part of it is very well fleshed out. What I didn't like about it, let me say what I did like about the character creation is that when she is camming, her name is Jessica. And when she is in her day-to-day life, she is Deanna. And it's like this double meaning that is also supposed to stand for her, kind of her Jekyll and Hyde personality. So sometimes she is absolutely fine when she's Deanna. When she's Jessica, I think she's a murderess, right? Like she wants to hurt people. I didn't like. I feel like this character suffers with the same things that, say, like Dexter would, because it's a similar kind of storyline. So Deanna finds out about this little girl, the 7-year-old girl who's kidnapped by someone who is a pedophile, and she wants to go rescue this little girl. She's like, let me use my powers for good here. What I didn't like is that you, as I said before, right, I read this book about psychopaths. You can't have a psychopath and also someone who's empathetic. You have to pick one. So psychopaths are allegiant only to themselves. They're loyal only to themselves. They're unpredictable. They're impulsive. She would not be able to contain this not desire to hurt other people, but it's more of like I want, so I'm going to do that thing, because who cares how it impacts other people? And so we would also see that pop up in different areas of her life, like impulsive spending or stealing or, other things that would impact other people. Another thing that I didn't really like was this. She's got this like Joker-esque persona, I think, right? So like I forget what his name is, the delivery guy, the UPS guy that she only has contact with through the door, comes into her apartment, and she just happens to be working. So she's nude and she jumps on him. She's like bloodthirsty. She grabs this knife. She jumps on him. She's ready to, do this thing. That's like not, do people do, like, that just felt really unrealistic to me. It felt very Joker-esque to me. Like, it felt like a caricature to me. And I realized this is fiction, right? Okay, so you can yell at me like, okay, Kayla, it's not supposed to be real. But it takes me out of a book. I rated this 3 stars. I'd probably say more like 3.5. I think A.R. Chore is a good writer. Most of the book I enjoyed. I thought it was a really good thriller. I was really, especially once it got to the point where she made a decision she wanted to help this girl. I wanted to know what happened next. I couldn't put it down. Check it out. See what you think. There were parts of this that involved romance that I did not like. And I skipped a couple, like I skimmed and I skipped a couple of chapters because it was boring to me. And as I understand it, so this is the first in a series, and I think that the relationship is fleshed out a little bit more. And so I don't think I'm interested in looking into any of the other books, but by no means was it bad. I just think that some areas could have used some polishing, which is actually interesting because this book was self-published before it was published by a larger publishing house. And the source material was run through the editing process at least once or twice. And so things were added, things were changed, things were taken away. And I'm really curious what the original source looked like, if that's the result that we got. So next, I can't show you the cover because someone is unaliving themselves on the cover, but this is Scanlines by Todd Kiesling. Here are all of the trigger warnings. This book deals extensively with the concept of taking one's own life. All of the characters experience this in some way, shape, or form. It is not for someone who is going to be sensitive to that. And I read to you in another video of mine the author's note. So, he has resources listed in the beginning of the book. He's aware of that. I think this may have been something Kiesling has struggled with himself. So he's very aware. And I don't want to say like he's trivializing this topic by any means, because I don't think he is. So what happens in this book is that it takes place in the late 90s, I think in 1998. These 3 boys are at two of the boys' house. So there's 2 brothers and then there's the main character. And they think they're downloading a Jenna Jameson film. why? I don't understand why people do that in groups. That's like weird to me. I don't think it's wrong, but I don't know that this is like a recreational thing I would do with my friends at any age. But boys, I guess that's what teenage boys did in the late 90s. And they accidentally or unknowingly download a video that shows this person on the cover taking their life. And it's called The Duncan Tape. And they begin seeing his face absolutely everywhere. They are seeing his face superimposed over other people's faces. They are having nightmares about it. And it's kind of like The Ring a little bit, in that if someone watches it, they are subjected to the same kind of psychological torture, I guess you could call it. And it's pretty inescapable. And the thing is, this book never comes to any kind of conclusion. Like, nothing happens. It's Hamlet-esque in that everyone dies. But, like, I don't understand what the point was. We never find out why this man is haunting these tapes, what he wants these people to do. Because, right, in The Ring, and in a lot of Japanese folklore, right, so in The Ring, this ghost of Samara wants the curse to spread, right? She wants her misery to spread to other people. So as soon as you make a copy of the tape and you leave it in some innocuous place and somebody else watches it, the curse is lifted from your own life. You're free, right? You've spread the misery. You've done the thing. You've become a part of the curse, essentially. No such thing happens here, right? Like, because this video spreads throughout the school and these people are still plagued by this. And there's really no resolution in the end. I think what's interesting about it is that it can be, I don't know if this is too like mental health professional of me, but I think we can generalize this to the experience of collective trauma, right? So I was thinking a lot about epidemics of skewer slide within schools, where if one or two students dies this way, it will have this ripple effect of other students doing the same, either in the same school or in the same district. It's a very precarious time for adults, who are witnessing this happen to their students. We could also, he talks a little bit about 9/11. That was an experience of collective trauma. In the United States, the Panini was an experience of collective trauma throughout the entire world. We can look at war, we can look at, all these large scale things that have happened and how that misery impacts people in such a way where you can't even close your eyes and escape it. And that people turn to things like religion or substance abuse to try to get away from them and can't, right? And in situations like that, there isn't a resolution. It just is something we either have to process or not, but we have to carry it around forever for the rest of our lives. And, how it impacts us is going to be completely individual. I did like all of the little references to like the early 90s or late 90s, early 2000s. I was 9 years old in 1998, but I do remember, ICQ, AIM, dial-up internet, all of those fun things, VHS tapes, obviously. So for the nostalgia, it was a good read. I don't think Todd Kiesling is a bad writer. And he's written other things. I think he said in the afterword that he was just kind of trying something different. There's also a foreword in here by Max Booth where I think he kind of references those exact experiences with collective trauma, especially when you're young. I'd be mildly interested in seeing what else he's written to see if it's any different. 3 stars, not a terrible book. Read it yourself, see what you think. It's a short read. It's only like 100 or so pages. It took me a couple of days. So that takes me all the way up to the book that I just finished last night, which was Dead Inside by Chandler Morrison. So let me start off by saying a couple of things about this book. Cover, trigger warnings. This book, before it was even published, I believe, was rife with controversy. So I don't recall the exact details, but I do know that there was some sort of like horror literature convention or something like that where Chandler Morrison had a performance art piece that involved a topic in this book that people were extremely upset about. And I believe that this had a pretty negative impact on, I don't know if it was his publisher, his editor, publicist, or some person who posts in the extreme horror lit subreddit. I think Jeff Burke is his name. Who kind of explained when it was, what I read about it anyways, from Jeff Burke's perspective, was that people weren't forewarned with regard to what this piece of performance art was going to involve, and therefore they could not opt out. And so that was kind of where it all went wrong, or at least, or maybe that's just what I'm getting from this. But I will say that, I'm not going to go into detail, but I will say that the performance piece involved fetuses and things that adults do to make fetuses. So I think it's pretty obvious that that's something that's going to be upsetting for a large number of people. And if they don't go in knowing, they're not like debriefed, there's no informed consent, that people are going to get pretty upset. That being said, the other piece that's crucial, I think, about this book is that it is satire. And it gives no indication of that. I read that actually in an interview with Chandler Morrison, that this was kind of satire on people who feel like they're on the fringes of society. If I didn't know that, I probably wouldn't have finished this book. The protagonist, who is never named, is so annoying. I think everyone in the Goodreads reviews agrees. Like, I couldn't wait to finish this book because the protagonist was annoying, just the way that he talks. He reminded me of the way that I spoke about the world when I was like 15 and like an edgy goth teenager. That's kind of how he sees the world. He's like a misanthrope, right? Like, he just hates people. He enjoys having adult time with women who are no longer breathing. And he meets a woman in the hospital who enjoys consuming babies who were never born, fetuses. And they have this really intense impact on each other that neither of them expect. And what's interesting about them is that they kind of have this role reversal by the end of the book, where Helen, who is the love interest, kind of turns into this like apathetic, nihilistic person that our protagonist once was. And our protagonist is starting to join the world of the living, where he's starting to fall in love with Helen, and he's starting to socialize more with other people and think about being a part of this world with other humans. And what really struck me about towards the end of this book, I'm not spoiling anything, but protagonist does not realize the gravity of the words that he says, of the things that he says. So just like when I was writing really cringy poetry at 15 years old, I was saying these things because I thought that they would shock people, or they would upset people, or they would make people mad, or, I thought that it communicated my misery or my rejection from society that, I definitely did not have when I was 15. And I didn't realize the gravity of the words that I was using and how that can impact me, and it could impact the people that were reading what I was writing. So our protagonist is saying these things to be edgy and to be this nihilist, but he doesn't realize that people are hearing them and they are changing people's views, and they have this negative impact on Helen that you see with the crux of the book, which was like, I felt like I had to take a shower after I read this book. It was wow. It was wow. That's all. Not a bad book. It was just fine. I gave it maybe 3.5 stars. Remember, 3-ply toilet paper. That's average. This book was just fine. I've heard that non-satire books by Chandler Morrison are pretty good. I think he's a good writer. I would like to check out some of his other books. I'll add them to my TBR for down the line. I really want to try a wide variety of authors before I read, before I dive into other works by the same authors. So that's where I'm at with that. I am taking a break currently with horror and extreme horror. I am currently reading Baba Yaga's Book of Witchcraft, which is about Slavic magic. So I am pagan. I consider myself pagan, but I have been really looking to connect with my ancestors' way of life. And so I found this book and I was like, ooh, this is really cool. Madame Pamita, who writes this book, is of Ukrainian descent. And so she kind of focuses on all of the Slavic countries, but on the Ukrainian experience in diaspora. So it's been pretty good so far. I'm reading that, and I'm putting some other books on hold for now. So that is my recent reads. Tell me what you've been reading recently. If you've read any of these books, what are your thoughts on them? What's on your TBR? I don't know what else to say, and I'm really bad at ending these videos. But anyways, thanks for listening. If you made it this far, like, subscribe, comment, fuel the engagement, the algorithm monster, whatever it's called. I'm going to list below my TikTok, my Instagram, and a link to my podcast if you're interested in checking it out. But otherwise, I will see you next time. Bye.